I'm very happy to be here today to talk about an action that the US chapter of WDI hosted at the headquarters of the UN in New York this past Sunday, which, as I said, was Mother's Day. I thought I would do that by telling you a bit about the preparation for the event, the training immediately preceding the event, and the event itself, which we think was a resounding success. But before getting into that, I'd like to show a brief video to explain exactly why we hold our events in the way that we do. The video that you'll see is from last December, where we held an event in Oakland, California. The first thing we did was deliver speeches on the steps of the courthouse, where there was a proceeding in the matter of California versus Rivers. This is the case where a man who claims to be a woman has been convicted of murdering a lesbian couple and their teenage son, and is likely to be housed in the California women's prison after he's sentenced. After we gave our speeches, we moved to a public square to hold our banners in front of traffic. Our banner said woman, adult, human, female, and no men in women's prison. In the video, a woman approaches us and tries to engage us in conversation. She says that she understands that Rivers is a man, but she maintains that Rivers should not be housed in the women's prison because the men's prison is violent. She refers to Rivers as she and her. While we were standing there, we knew that so-called trans activists were about to attack us, and attack us they did. We were fully prepared for it, and we had been trained not to react. You'll see them approach us, throw things at us, and tear our banners away. Watch the woman's reaction.
I do have criminal justice.
We're open to it, we're just not doing that today.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do have that education. Oh, I don't have that. Whoa. What's this about? Why are we doing this? They're violent. They're violent men. They're violent men. What do you? This is male. Why are we doing this?
These are violent men. These are violent men. They're violent men. They just had fun. Yeah, these are the men that we like to not have to be in prison with. So.
What the hell?
What did you think they were? This is what did you think they do? I don't know why you would think anything. I didn't quite get this.
I don't get that. Why did they took your sign?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. Oh my God, freedom of expression. Who are these people?
Yes.
Holy crap.
And
I didn't even plan on being here. Thank you for being here. Holy crap.
Hey, buddy.
What we're up against. And this has happened in Portland, in Tacoma, in
Why can't we have a
Chicago,
dialogue?
in New York.
Why can't we have a dialogue?
I have people.
Sorry.
Hello.
Holy crap. I wasn't prepared for that.
Okay, so immediate peak trans. And, this woman didn't agree with our message at first. She wanted to say that Rivers ought to be housed in the women's prison because the men's prison is violent, which it is. And as soon as that happened, she could immediately see what was going on. Okay, so for New York. In preparation, the US chapter has been holding events that are designed to give women a platform to explain how gender identity affects women and girls, either themselves as individuals or women and girls as a sex class. These are meant to be somewhat like Kelly J. Keene's Let Women Speak events, but they're also a bit different. Unlike Kelly J., our aim is not just to give women a mic and say whatever they'd like, which is a great aim. Instead, we have a small number of women give planned speeches after a period of training, and our events are slightly more structured in that we plan everything in advance to the extent possible. All of this is done in accordance with the principles of nonviolent direct action, or NVDA. None of this is meant to disparage Kelly J. or her events in any way at all. As many know, I myself have participated in several of her events, and if I ever make it back to the UK again, or if she makes her way to the US again, I will happily participate in another one. It's just that our events are a bit different. So we realize this is all somewhat controversial and that not all women want to participate in events that are designed around the principles of nonviolent direct action. We think that's totally fine, and our aim is not to tell women how they should engage in activism. It's just that we have decided that for our events, we are committed to these principles. All of this plays out in the preparatory steps that we take for each event. We picked New York, specifically Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza at the UN, for one very practical reason, which is simply that one of our more active members was already planning to be there for a vacation. But we also picked New York for a very different reason, which is that we knew that New York is a place where our opponents, the men and some women, who don't think women ought to be allowed to talk about gender identity and the threats that it poses to women and girls were likely to show up. In other words, we chose our location strategically. We did it deliberately because we want the opposition to show up. Why would we do this? Why would we deliberately put ourselves in a position where we know that the opposition is likely to come and attack us? The answer is simple. We all know that systemic violence against women, including women who speak out about gender identity, exists. But the general public, at least here in the States, doesn't yet know that. Our aim is to make the violence visible to members of the general public. We want to show members of the general public that we women are calm, professional, and clear-sighted, whereas the men who hate us behave like lunatics by jumping up and down, banging on pots and pans, and sometimes inflicting actual violence on us. Kelly J has done a tremendous job of bringing awareness of this dynamic to the public globally, but plenty of Americans are still in the dark about what is happening. Most Americans still think that the battle over gender identity is a battle between conservatives and a small marginalized community. They don't know that there is a feminist critique of gender identity. Our aim is to make them aware of it by engaging with them on the street, educating them, and letting the opposition show themselves for who they are. We take inspiration for this tactic from many movements that have used nonviolent direct action successfully in the past, all over the world, including the movement for American women's suffrage. I don't know how suffrage movements have played out in other countries, but in the US, the general public did not get on board with the movement until women allowed themselves to be arrested and force-fed. They did that deliberately in order to make the violence visible. Another source of inspiration is the American Freedom Rides. In 1961, a group of young people, Black and white, got on buses and traveled into the American Deep South. Doing that was illegal at the time. Racial segregation was both legal and rampant. So these brave young people deliberately put themselves in positions of danger by desegregating buses and riding into an area of the country that was plagued with systemic racism. When they got into the Deep South, they were met with horrific violence at the hands of white supremacists. They knew exactly what they were doing. The instructions were always the same in the training that they received. When someone comes at you with epithets and assaults, you always maintain your composure. Under no circumstances do you engage in similar conduct, and under no circumstances do you ever resort to violence. Our aim is explicitly not to fight back. Our aim is always to make the opposition's violence against us visible to the general population. That's how the first wave feminists won suffrage, and it's how the civil rights movement won integration. Movements all over the world have used these very same tactics to win their political movements, including in the Baltic states, East Germany, Liberia, and the Philippines. These tactics are perfect for movements like ours, movements that have no money, no power, and no public support. We aim to win, and we think this is the way to go about it. So in preparation for this event, we chose our location, coordinated our outfits with white shirts and black sashes that said woman, adult, human, female, made sure all of our equipment was in working order, coordinated our handouts, planned the training, and invited participants who were interested in learning more about these tactics. We did not open the event up to anyone. We realize this is controversial too, but we did it for a reason. We did it because not everyone is suited to do every type of activism, and we stand by that. For example, there are many things that I am terrible at, and I would never be offended if someone told me that I was not suited to engage in a particular activity. Okay, the training. I cannot stress enough how critical the training is. We gathered on Friday night for dinner and to get to know each other. Some of us had participated in previous events, but for several of us, this was our first time. There were 12 of us in total. The main reason for all of this is to build camaraderie and sisterhood. Again, we knew that on Sunday, we were going to be in a situation where we were deliberately putting ourselves at risk. We had to know that we all had each other's backs if the situation got dangerous. You can't do that with a bunch of strangers. We had to get to know each other, and we had to trust that each of us would understand and could practice according to the principles of nonviolent direct action. The training began on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. with a talk and a presentation by Lear Keith. So here's Lear giving us our presentation. I've seen Lear's presentation several times, and I can't stress enough how important it is. Lear goes through several examples of the use of nonviolent direct action all over the world throughout history and explains why its principles work so effectively. She explains the differences between liberalism and radicalism and why nonviolent direct action is critical to radicals who want to succeed in dismantling the power structures that are keeping us in a position of subservience. In my view, the most important takeaway from her presentation is that the use of nonviolent direct action is not passivity, and it's not done out of a sense of moralism or being nice. It's a very deliberate use of nonviolent force to expose violence and seize power. It works by persuading members of the public that we're in the right. We use it to expose the violence of the trans activists to the general public. Lier has given various versions of this presentation at various WI events, and you can find them on our YouTube channel. After the presentation, we watched a movie called Freedom Riders, which is freely available on PBS. I don't know if it's available outside the US, but if you're interested, please give it a try. It's an extremely moving and very educational account of how a bunch of young people essentially desegregated the American South. In the early 1960s, President Kennedy was not particularly interested in the civil rights struggle. He thought it was a bit of a nuisance. But these brave young people made him pay attention. By engaging in nonviolent direct action to expose the violence of white supremacy, this group of very brave young people got the attention of the President of the United States and forced him to take action. After the movie, we had lunch, and then we spent the afternoon rehearsing. We planned out every step of the action so that each of us knew exactly what we were going to do. We rehearsed unfurling our banners, and we knew exactly where each of us was going to stand. We planned the order of the speeches. We rehearsed how we would behave if we got attacked by trans activists. We left no detail to chance. So here we are in the plaza reading our speeches. The entire event is available on the WDI YouTube channel. But there are a couple of things going on in this picture that you can't tell from looking at it or even from watching the video. First, I just want to share that the woman speaking here in this image is Jessica Gonzalez, who founded the TERF Collective and who has appeared on Feminist Question Time before. Jessica was not originally planning to speak. The reason that she did is that earlier that morning, another woman named Lorraine, who serves on the board of WDI USA, learned that there was an emergency involving her mother. Lorraine had planned to give her talk, but because of the emergency, she had to leave immediately, and Jessica agreed to step in and read her speech with Lorraine's permission. We learned just a few hours later that Lorraine's mother had died on Mother's Day. It was just awful. Lorraine, I don't know if you're here today, but if you are, please know that our hearts were very much with you while Jessica read your speech. What you can't tell from looking at this is that we were all very aware that trans activists had in fact arrived at that point. That's why we're looking in all sorts of directions. We could see them sort of lurking to our far right, and we were hyper aware that they may be coming at us from other directions too. We were all very aware of what might be coming. Another thing you can see here that wasn't supposed to be there is a red plastic bag on the ground behind us. We had previously placed it outside the shot to our right, so it wouldn't be visible in the live stream or the recording. But as soon as we noticed the presence of the trans activists to our right, we moved it so that it was behind us because we didn't want them to steal it. So the trans activists left us alone for our talks. A few onlookers expressed interest. A woman walked by filming us, and I went to give her a handout containing a list of the articles of the Declaration, as well as a QR code for accessing the Declaration directly online. Another woman wearing a jogging outfit was sitting on one of the benches, listening and filming us while we talked. She'll become relevant in a few minutes. We then decided to move from the plaza to the street so that more passersby could see our banners. The nearest intersection was the corner of 2nd Avenue and 47th Street. And for anyone who doesn't know, 2nd Avenue in New York is an extremely busy street, and we knew we could get a lot of attention on that corner. Our plan was really just to generate interest in the Declaration, but then something else happened. These guys showed up. So we all know what this is by now. These are guys and one woman in the pink hat wearing black and face masks in their attempts to intimidate us and make us go away. We were fully prepared for them to physically attack us, but they didn't. At one point, I asked them if they would like to have a conversation. They simply grunted in response. You can see in the picture that one of them is holding a very sad little speaker, which was blaring music, presumably in an attempt to silence us. But that was a bit silly because we had already given our speeches and we weren't even talking at that point. Our banners were doing our talking for us. So this is them trying to block traffic from seeing our banners and sort of succeeding, but we refused to be deterred. The two women holding this banner are Lauren and Natalie, and after these guys tried to get in their way, they simply lifted the banner higher. Lauren reports that this really irritated the guy with the bike, whose hand was twitching on his handlebars. He really wanted to punch us. So this is obviously from behind the banner, but the women holding this banner are Jessica and Liz, and they opted for a different tactic. When trans activists tried to block their banner, they just started skipping around, holding on to it. It became a pretty delightful game of cat and mouse, where every time the trans activists attempted to block them, they would just move in a different direction. The trans activists would follow them around, but they didn't accomplish much of anything. This is Jessica having a fabulous time ignoring the poor, sad man who was following them. In the end, they didn't end up using any actual violence against us. We think there are two reasons for this. One is that there was a police vehicle there the entire time. We don't know exactly why, but it's reasonable to wonder if Kelly J. Keene's event in New York last fall taught the New York Police Department a lesson about how violent these guys can be. But the other reason we think they didn't physically attack us was that there were too few of them. One of the reasons these guys have been so successful in attacking women who speak out is that they engage in mob violence and are not easily identifiable as individuals. But on this day, there were only 4 of them. And if they physically attacked us in front of a bunch of people on 2nd Avenue, it would have been much harder for them to get away with it. So earlier I mentioned that there was a woman sitting on a bench during our speeches, listening and filming. While all of this was going on with the trans activists, she was watching that too. She approached us later to tell us that she is completely supportive of our message. She could hear with her ears what we were saying, and she could see with her own eyes that the opposition has no arguments, that they're only about aggression and intimidation. She took our flyer and later reached out to Joe to say that she had attended our event and wanted to get involved. We sent her the declaration and an invitation to volunteer. At the end of the day, we are getting our message out. It's taking longer than any of us would like, but we plan to keep persevering. Women are waking up, and that's thanks in large part to the great work of the women of WDI all over the world. Thanks, everyone. Keep turfing. We're going to win.